Oh my goodness. Greetings everybody, my name is Mars, and I am host of the Watcher's Prophecy News on KW Radio. Tonight we have all kinds of madness, and I would like you to tell your friends, our society, the National Watcher Society, does its part to help folks understand the very complex world of prophecy and our survival in times of great disasters. I want to thank you for tuning in to KW Radio tonight and hear this important message. Now, the facilitators of the real-life drama that is unfolding before us are busily mopping up the blood from the stage right before the final curtain call. It's coming right down the pike now. It is the blood of the victims of global restructuring, from the lies of the Arab Spring all the way to the blood trail in Benghazi. We're bringing that up tonight a little bit because there is corruption in very high places and doesn't just deal with that, deals with many other things. Theme of our show tonight, in fact, we're going to get into John F. Kennedy in a little bit, but we are instructed right now as citizens of the United States by the left to remain seated. They don't want us to stand up. They want us to await their next act, or the opening act of the play of the millennia. For it is in that act that will usher in the new world structured by a new world order. One produced and directed by the global elite, the elite that exists only in the minds of the marginalized. We watch as the global stage is being set for confrontation and conflict. That's going on in a lot of strange places. And the powers that be prepared to burn it all down. Burn it down they will, as they busily feather their own nest from the feathers of the phoenix. It is difficult to comprehend the depravity of the globalists, for decent moral people are really just not wired to think in such terms. They get up, they go to work, they pay bills, they take care of their families, never thinking, oh, tomorrow could be nuclear war. Just because to succeed in this life, you have to be positive, yet just under the surface lays the knowledge of things bizarre. It's all part of the conditioning process, the awakening, as we have been conditioned to accept that the laws of immoral supersede all. Those of you who don't believe this is possible are what you read simply just the ramblings of some lunatic on the radio. Consider those not just killed by war, but by the slaughter of the 56 plus million innocent unborn children over the last 40 years. Soil is soaked by their blood, yet we accept it. It's not just legal and therefore acceptable, but a practice that has been exhorted and extorted literally across our planet. Also one and the same are the different political parties that exist only for the entertainment on this seemingly satanic stage that we must fight very hard against. So we have seen that although their costumes are different, the roles are not. Their goal is the same: anarchy. Otherwise, we as Americans would see some positive progression, some repair, some healing. Instead, we've been locked into a swirling spiral of physical, moral, and spiritual decay. No political solution exists. No Donald Trump that can fix our spiritual devolution. Political leaders are no longer statesmen, but whoremongers for the grossly perverse elite class. Regardless of political party or ideological identities, these characters continuously express themselves all over the news. They call it real news, fake news, whatever. Doesn't matter. Still getting into your head somewhere. They have sold their very souls to the author of confusion, death, and destruction. Tonight, we have a lot of things happening, and so we're going to shift gears and get with some of our current alerts before we get to our main focus tonight. Want you to keep your eyes on Israel. I believe that's where the next big focal point is going to be. Level of distrust is now went through the very ceiling as Bibi Netanyahu can no longer convince his people are safe with the United States allowing Iran to hasten getting the bomb, and many think the decision to attack is only a short time away for Israel. All eyes have been on Russia's action in the Ukraine and back and forth threats and sanctions between Russia, the U.S., and the EU. Israel has been preparing and given the IDF orders to continue readying for possible independent strike upon Iran. Bibi said if we have to, we'll do it ourselves. Political leaders are no longer statesmen, really. I don't think they really express what people see as the truth in the way we should all get along. They don't express that. And Israel is in dire need right now of being able to express on its people that it's going to protect them. It's called indirect warfare. Gives U.S. proxies, including Israel, who wage war on behalf of Uncle Sam and in liaison with Pentagon, the first strike Israel option does not officially have the blessing of the Trump administration. Let's be under no illusion about that. But it has for several years, even under Obama, been part of the Pentagon's war plan, this indirect warfare solution. It's part of the overall plan for World War III, and they are definitely taking an active role in getting everyone to that point. Should Israel strike Iran, U.S. and NATO under agreements would be forced to defend Israel in case of retaliation, but once again, enter Russia, who sides with Iran. Battle lines have been drawn out, and all in all, it will just take one single spark before all-out world war is being fought. Right now, missiles are being shot into Israel. Seems like every few days. Tensions there are very high. Now, shifting gears again, I've got some more news out of Russia. Russia is now saying that unless Trump eases Russian sanctions, that they are going to invade fully invade with everything they've got, Ukraine. Want you watchers to be watching this story also. It is developing and becoming very important. All right, now let's get into our main topic tonight, because I received an email of interest from a dear friend of mine, and he sent me some links that dealt with John F. Kennedy and aliens. And I was not intending on doing any kind of alien show tonight. This show is mainly about John F. Kennedy and the assassination, but why he was killed. Now, was JFK killed because of his interest in aliens and UFOs? Well, I've got some news tonight that is so shocking that you just may change your mind about the reason Kennedy was assassinated. Secret memo I have shows President John F. Kennedy demanded UFO files just 10 days before his death, and inquired with J. Edgar Hoover, that's right, on whether or not his agency could curtail the American public if they knew. Really? Uncovered letter written by John F. Kennedy to the head of the CIA shows that the president demanded to be shown highly confidential documents about UFOs just 10 days before his assassination. Secret memo is only one of two letters that were written by JFK asking for information about the paranormal, and I'm saying that very loosely. In fact, in this letter was about the, quote, so-called captive aliens, things that we'd found in Roswell, on November 12, 1963, which may have been released by the CIA for the very first time in this latest batch of CIA documents. Now, when this document was ran across, it was sent directly to me, and I got reading this, and I'm telling you, there is a cast of players in here you're not going to believe, including former President George Walker Bush, the first Bush. Second memo sent to the NASA administrator. The president expresses a desire for cooperation with the former Soviet Union on mutual outer space activities and disclosures. That's right. Now, the previously classified documents were released under the Freedom of Information Act, and this big batch of documents that's come out is readily available for all to read. Said that JFK's interest in UFOs could have been fueled by concerns about current relations. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, everything else going on, about relations with the former Soviet Union. One of his concerns was that a lot of these UFOs were being seen over the Soviet Union, and he was very concerned that the Soviets might misinterpret these UFOs as U.S. aggression. Now, believing that it was some of our technology, Mr. Lester told AOL News. Now, I've got some quotes from this news reporter. His name is Mark Lester of AOL News. And I'm going to get some of this in a minute. I'm trying to sort all this out because when you see the big picture of this, you're going to definitely scratch your head and take a big leap of wonder. Now, I think this is one of the reasons why he wanted to get his hands on this information and get it away from the jurisdiction of NASA so he could say to the Soviets, look, it's not us. We're not doing it. We're not being provocative. We do know something. But in order to tell you, we have to also tell the American people, and I'm going to do that in Dallas. That's right. Now, on the first page, the director of Central Intelligence wrote, as you must know, Lancer was the CIA's code name for the president, JFK. Lancer has made some inquiries regarding our activities, which we cannot allow. That's on the first page. The director of the CIA wrote, as you must know, Lancer has made some inquiries regarding our activities, which we cannot allow. Please submit your views no later than October. Your action to this matter is critical to the continuance of the group. When I tell you who wrote all this, you're really going to think it's funny. Of course, the group he's referring to is Majestic 12. I'm sure you may have heard of that. Now, there was and is ongoing a conspiracy, and the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy is smack in the middle of this. The term conspiracy theory is the creation of the CIA. It was designed to denigrate and marginalize the people who disagreed with the ridiculous Warren report on the assassination of American President JFK. The government needed the American people to believe in their single shooter magic bullet theory, even planting the bullets, and they needed that shooter to be Lee Harvey Oswald, and then that loose end tied up. Anyone who dared to disagree was labeled a, quote, and this is how that term started, just so there's no mistaking. Oh, Mars is a conspiracy theorist. Mars is a conspiracy, really? Really? Anyone who dared to disagree was labeled a conspiracy theorist. That's right. JFK was shot and killed 53 years ago. And quite frankly, people don't really care anymore if the killer was Oswald or a conspiracy or by our own government, even if we really knew, unless it was shocking new revelations about some end of time prophecy, the alien demonic conspiracy, which they are demons. You wouldn't be that impressed. But if you should care, because those same people who pulled off the hit on Kennedy remain in power right now in America today. They represent the same power structure that just allowed crooked Hillary Clinton to walk away scot-free, even as the FBI declared her guilty as sin. They are America's shadow government, and they are utterly ruthless. Believe me, I've had more than one trick pulled on my computer. See, there's a lot of people that don't like me now. Because I'm getting out, I'm starting to move, I am telling the truth. I am getting out there. I'm reaching the masses. And those that argue that groups like Skull and Bones, these private society clubs, it's just a harmless fraternity or some kind of Boy Scouts club, may ask themselves whether or not it's okay for leaders of open and republic societies, democratic societies, to be members of secret organizations whose agendas are not to be disclosed forever, for any reason, to the public. And those things hide the very conspiracy theories that we're talking about here tonight. Now, this is a quote from George Senior Bush. My senior year, I joined Skull and Bones, a secret society. So secret, in fact, I can't say anything more. George W. Bush, President of the United States of America. He said that while he was president. Now, we know the father of George Bush, his name was Prescott Bush. He made his fortune by financing the war effort. You can look this up, dollar for dollar. I'm not kidding. George W. Bush, President of the United States, rose to his great influence and power through the oil market and other initiatives off the money and name and financing of his father, Prescott Bush. Now, Prescott Bush made his fortune by financing the war effort of Adolf Hitler. Together with his banking partners and fellow bonesmen, Arville and Roland Harriman. Prescott was stripped of his holdings in the Union Banking Corporation in 1942 under the Trade with the Enemy Act. That's right. He was censored, just like Bush is doing now, and has done in the past, censoring people, having them censored. And I'm going to tell you how Bush came to become the censorer. That's right. May sound a little strange, but the son, Bush, father, Bush, the grandfather, Prescott Bush, are in this knee-deep. On March 19th, 1934, Prescott Bush handed Arville Harriman a copy of that day's New York Times. The Polish government was applying to take over Consolidated Steel Corporation and Upper Silesian Coal Company and Steel Company from German and American interest because of rampant mismanagement, excessive borrowing, fictitious bookkeeping, and gambling in the securities field. Polish government required the owners of the company, which counted for about 45% of Poland's steel production, to pay for at least its full share of back taxes. Bush and Harriman would eventually hire attorney John Foster Dulles to help cover up any improprieties that might arise under the investigative scrutiny. Source, Heir to the Holocaust by Toby Rogers. Now, when I was looking this stuff up, I got thinking, well, so we see now the connection to the rise in power of the great amount of money given to the eldest Bush, Prescott Bush. Now, John Foster Dulles was brother of Allen Dulles, the later CIA director, okay, who was the architect, together with Vice President Richard Nixon and George Bush, of the Bay of Pigs invasion to overthrow Fidel Castro's Cuba. That's right. Allen Dulles was fired by President Kennedy because of the fiasco of the Bay of Pigs. Yet Allen Dulles was appointed by Lyndon Johnson to serve on the Warren Commission to investigate JFK's death. Now, folks, that is a paradox that is far too grand and too severe of a thing to be labeled a conspiracy theory. A vice president of Empire Trust in Dallas was Jack Crittenden, also president of NAFCO Oil and Gas, who was connected with Army Reserve Intelligence. Vice President Jack Crittenden, Empire Trust in Dallas. Okay, NAFCO Oil and Gas chief, connected with Army Reserve Intelligence. In 1995, Fabian Escalante, the chief of the Cuban Counterintelligence Unit during the late 1950s and early 60s, described that as soon as intelligence was received from agents in Cuba that Fidel Castro had converted to communism, a plan called Operation 40 was put into effect by the National Security Council, presided over by Vice President Richard Nixon. Escalante indicates that Nixon was the Cuban case officer who had assembled an important group of businessmen headed by George Bush and Jack Crittenden, both Texas oilmen, to gather the necessary funds for the operation. Now, this gets so deep because we are starting to get into family ties of corruption. Now, there is a description of a group of Dallas men who surrounded Marina Oswald as soon as her husband had been arrested, but before he was killed by Jack Ruby. These were intelligence operatives seeking out Russian speakers. Ayala Mamatodoff, probably murdered that, knew George Bush and spoke Russian. A geologist with Sun Oil, he received a call 5 hours after the assassination from Jack Crittenden, who was at that time the president of NAFCO Oil and Gas and a former military naval chief officer, as I told you earlier, then attached to Army Reserve Intelligence. Crittenden was also director of the Dorchester Gas Producing Company with D.H. Byrd, who owned the Texas School Book Depository Building. So you're telling me that every one of these members, who are, by the way, skull and bones, and he owns the Texas School Book Depository Building? Really? And was a close friend of Lyndon Johnson. It is also strange that Jack Crittenden was a member of MJ-12 as well. If anyone has ever heard of that project. Oh, it's getting deeper. In 1968, 6 months after the assassination of Robert Kennedy, Prescott writes writes this letter to Clover Dulles, wife of Allen Dulles. Notice that in this letter, I could read some of it, but it says he blames the Kennedys for the failure of the Bay of Pigs and says that and another thing is going to get him killed. Okay? Now, we are going to really pick this up because that letter was written before his death. In 1950s, Prescott and the Harrimans are the founding fathers of CBS. In 63, CBS reporter Dan Rather makes his career break with the Kennedy assassination by lying to the American public that he sees JFK's head move violently forward on the Zapruder film. To hear Dan Rather lying, you can find that very easily on YouTube. I did. The lie is very possible because the Zapruder film was bought by Time Life and kept lock and barrel from the public for 14 years before it was even first examined. Time Life is founded and owned by Henry Luce, also a member of Skull and Bones. Really? 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 Is that why the Zapruder film was locked up for 14 years? Ooh. Luce had many friends. Among them, General Edward Lansdale, a known covert operative for the CIA, Henry's wife. Claire Booth Luce, Congresswoman, is a radical supporter of the anti-Castro movement and personal friends with another high-ranking covert operative for the CIA and a resident from Fort Worth, David Ali Phillips. Edward Lansdale and David Phillips are widely accepted as key planners of the JFK assassination. There are also exact matches for the covert operations specialist, Phillips, and the top brass in the military intelligence from Asia, Lansdale, and described in Sam Giancana's biography, Double Cross. If you'd like to read that, I believe it to be a true account. David Lee Phillips was the mastermind for the CIA staged coup by Pinochet in 1973, as well as the overthrow in 1954 of the Guatemala regime headed by Ricardo Alvarez, I believe. He is working closely at that time with the CIA and an officer named Howard Hunt. You might have heard that name. Another suspect in the plot to kill JFK and the leader of the infamous Watergate burglar team in the 1950s and 60s. Now, Phillips is the CIA case officer for the anti-Castro Cubans in Havana and Mexico City. He is also the CIA controller for Lee Harvey Oswald and James Files. So now the man who has set up the murder of JFK in the CIA, Mr. Phillips, is both the CIA case officer for anti-Castro Cubans in Havana and Mexico City, and he is also the CIA controller for Lee Harvey Oswald and James Files. Now, James Files has confessed that he fired the shots into JFK's head from behind picket fence on the grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza. This story is completely ignored by the mainstream media and is 100% true. Seems strange because even if there were lying, and I highly doubt that, one would expect some kind of exposure. Star of David Lee Phillips rises to CIA Director of Covert Operations for the Western Hemisphere, according to his nephew, Sean Phillips, who is quite a famous musician, by the way. David Lee Phillips confirmed to his brother, James Lee Phillips, that he was definitely in Dallas the day that Kennedy died, and that email was released with the CIA lot of emails. See, they are confessing their sins little by little. It's very easy to put this together. Now, Prescott Bush advised Eisenhower to run for president. Then he launched Richard Nixon into the vice presidency. And after that, he was a major financier of Nixon's presidential campaign against Kennedy. Now, who is to say the Bush telephone call really came from Tyler, Texas? You have to understand, in the investigation of Bush was there in Dallas as well, and he claimed that at the exact time of the Kennedy assassination, he was on the telephone. To his own admission, this document, CIA released, places Bush in Dallas for the remainder of the day and night, November 22nd of 1963. He is implicating a political activist, James Parrott, in the process. Why did Bush want to keep his telephone call confidential? CIA certainly did not ask him who he was talking to. And why does he not remember it? He says now he doesn't remember any of it. Of course, that's the prerogative of ex-presidents. They don't have to remember anything. Now, why did he give this warning after the assassination if he thought that Parrott was a serious threat for Kennedy in Houston? Kennedy had just visited Houston the day before. And why are the sources of this heresy information unknown? Who told him this, if anyone? Or was this just some document that the CIA released to furnish Bush with some kind of real alibi, 50, 60 years later, and this realistic, plausible deniability 30 years later? The same James Parrott that pulled the trigger that Bush was accusing is working on Bush's presidential campaign against Bill Clinton, by the way. That's how tight they were. And he's also a member of Skull and Bones. Now, if someone tried to kill, or if someone tried to finger me for killing President Kennedy, let's say, that person would have to definitely be my worst enemy. And they would have to have some very condemning evidence on me. The FBI agent that took Bush's call, Bush made a second phone call after the first phone call. Now, the second phone call was recorded. This FBI agent was smart enough at the time to record Bush's second phone call. Now, Bush called the FBI. Really? So I just happened to be in Dallas during the day that President Kennedy is being assassinated. I'm a CIA officer, and I'm on a hitman team setting it all up, and I've been spotted. I made one phone call. No one knows about anything about that phone call. But the second phone call, I called the FBI. Even Nixon admitted that Bush was in Dallas. Nixon admitted that he also was in Dallas, but gave conflicting accounts. Now, there are all kinds of other evidence that you can look up online and find out that ties Nixon to key players in the JFK assassination. There is a ton of bombshell documents states that Jack Ruby worked directly for Nixon. It is not that big of a stretch. You can look at the documents and see the proof. And Ruby was just a punk with no connections to anyone. That's not true. Now, one of the most tantalizing nuggets about the Nixon's possible role inside knowledge of the JFK assassination secrets was buried on the White House tape until 2002. On this tape, which was also disclosed by the CIA, are records in May of 72. The president confided to two top aides that the Warren Commission pulled off. I want you to hear this. This is out of Nixon's mouth. These are tapes the CIA released along with that huge FOIA dump that was dumped out just a few weeks ago. And he says on this tape, this is Nixon going, the fact is, the greatest hoax that has ever been perpetuated, that the Warren Commission pulled off, the greatest hoax that has ever been perpetuated. Fortunately, Nixon did not elaborate, but the context in which Nixon raised the matter shows just how low he could stoop in efforts to assassinate the character of his political adversaries, the Bushes. Now, the Republican president made the hoax observation in the immediate aftermath of the assassination attempt against White House hopeful George Wallace. Well, a lot of people understand that the Wallace assassination attempt was part of the overall cover-up. We've got other news on that, but we're not going in that direction right now. Now, in a statement from Jim Marrs, a lot of people have heard of him. He's a popular book writer. He is talking with a gentleman named James Files, whom I mentioned earlier. And during this interview, I'm going to read a portion of it. I think it has a great bearing upon the assassination. Now, Jim Marrs says, interviewing James Files, he says, during the time of the Bay of Pigs, while you were training and moving around in the Caribbean, no name, key, and all that, did you ever hear the name George Herbert Walker Bush? James Files immediately jumps up and says, oh yeah. Jim Marrs says, what was his role? James Files, George Herbert Walker Bush. I don't know if I think a lot of people are not going to believe this, but he worked for the CIA back as early as 1961 that I know of. That places him, by the way, as an officer of the CIA at the time of the assassination. I know for sure he did something for the Air Force that was also very, very covert as well. I'm scratching my head now. The Air Force? Jim Marrs, how did he work? What did he do? James Files, I don't know all he did, but he did a lot of recruiting work. I know he was there at the beginning for what was called Group 40, which I mentioned earlier. A special operations group, Group 40. If you wonder what Group 40 was, it was an assassination group. He hired the best killers out of all the branches. Now this is Papa Bush, who was rolling across the green there at Super Bowl. Now, Operation 40 was a top-secret CIA project to train selected Cuban exiles in guerrilla warfare and assassinations aimed at the Castro regime. Apart from Felix Rodriguez, other members were now infamous CIA agents, anti-Castro terrorists like Luis Posada Correas and Orlando Bosch. There were many of the later Watergate plumbers, Frank Sturgis, Eugenio Martinez, Virginio Gonzalez, and E. Howard Hunt. Most of the Operation 40 members were recruited from J.M. Wave, a much larger clandestine operation to train Cuban exile army for the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, J.M. Wave was an operation that our government was putting together to find the best of the best shock value killers, and because it was going on at the same time, Elder Bush went and picked many of his killers directly from this batch. These were the same killers that later turned up in other documents and confessions that all this was implicated, and in the CIA official documents, Theodore Shackley, James Files, the confessed gunman on the Grassy Knoll, was recruited for the CIA by David Atlee Phillips on a recommendation of Ted Shackley. Shackley becomes George Bush's deputy director for covert operations in 1976, and then put in charge of direct liaison between the science team at Nellis Air Force Base. Why? Well, we've got a big shocker about why he was then put as a direct liaison between the science team at Nellis Air Force Base. We're going to have a shocker about this. Now, the CIA controller of JFK's assassination is provably close to Shackley. But Shackley is provably close to Bush. I think this is very significant. Shackley's second man in command of JM Wave is David Shantez Morales, who is also working close with David Atlee Phillips and develops a reputation as best CIA assassin for Latin America. Cuban state security officials speculate that this, quote, Oswald plan was an entire cover. Complete cover. The CIA now says this in a document that forget everything you know about the Warren Commission. It's all a cover. It's all a cover. Cuban state security officials speculate that Morales was the dark-complected man, as seen by several witnesses on the 6th-floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. Just after telling friends he was afraid of his own people, and just before he was scheduled to testify at the House Select Committee of Assassinations, Morales suddenly died in 1977 of a sudden, unexplained, massive heart attack under mysterious circumstances and under the influence of alcohol. Notice he had been locked up. Okay? He had hinted to close friends that he had been involved in the Kennedy assassination. Well, Skull and Bones took care of that sucker, didn't they? Morales was a big, muscular man, a very dark complexion, nicknamed El Indio. Several witnesses on Dealey Plaza ID'd him, most of whom were not called to testify before the Warren Commission, described a man fitting Morales' description to a T. Two of these picked him out of a lineup. These witnesses saw such a man on the window of the 6th story of the Texas School Book Depository shortly before Kennedy's motorcade passed by, as well as minutes after the shooting, fleeing from the back of the building with two other men in a station wagon. That's right. The architects for the Bay of Pigs were Vice President Richard Nixon, CIA Director Allen Dulles. JFK inherited the plan from the Eisenhower administration. Nixon lost the race for the presidency to JFK, and Dulles was fired by JFK for the failure of the Bay of Pigs. It all makes perfect sense. That's how the cover-up originated. Yet Dulles is appointed by the President Johnson as a Warren Commission member to investigate JFK's murder. That's right. Dulles is then appointed by Lyndon Johnson as a Warren Commission member to investigate his murder. It's like letting the killer investigate. We'll make sure we put a lid on this one. The proof for Bush's lie about his CIA past can be found in this document declassified in '88. And of course, in this big batch of emails, had nothing to do with the Bay of Pigs, but rather that the assassination of JFK was about him being a radical, loose, and unpredictable cannon, and what was about to spill the existence of UFOs and what we knew about them to the world. That's right. Now, I got some more on this. I'm going to shock you before we get done. But perhaps the real shocker is that G.W. Bush was located in the M12 documents starting in '62 and listed as the contact for General Fowler as the, quote, fix-it man. Fix-it man? You mean the head of the assassination squad could later in another email be called the fix-it man? Not George W. Bush, not him. General Fowler stated in '61 message President Kennedy that he could not, for any reason, disclose any of the information that dealt with the aliens, as we needed the technology. This is right out of the email, right out of the paper. Could not disclose any of the information that dealt with the aliens, as we needed the technology for our military-industrial complex edge, and that the Russians were not to find out, meaning no one was to ever find out. Just assure them somehow that it's not us flying around so we don't spark some nuclear conflict. JFK made remarks that he would ensure the American people that he would tell them about the UFO threat and the government's knowledge of aliens being kept alive at Nellis secret properties. Just so you know now, there could be many reasons still for the death of JFK. But the Bush-Info connection is strong, and there's still much more that you can dig for. This is Mars. I want to thank you, and I appreciate everyone's time tonight. I have been a little bit under the weather. I didn't get to do a show last week. I was so sick, but I appreciate all the prayers from all the listeners to the Watcher Society and everyone else who hears my program. I am certainly not the best radio host, but I always hope that I can entertain you a little bit and give you some factual knowledge that may reshape your paradigm thinking about many things. God bless you. I love you. And good night.